Picture this. It's 2 a.m. in a suburban house somewhere in the world. Through a kitchen window, moonlight spills across the backyard. A cat moves through the grass, absolutely silent, each paw placed with surgical precision. Its eyes are locked on something you can't see. A mouse, maybe, or a moth. Every muscle coiled, focused, alone. It's completely unaware that you're watching, completely indifferent that you exist at all. Now cut to the front door. Same house, same night. A dog hears your car pulling into the driveway from 3 blocks away. By the time you reach the door, it's already there, entire body wagging, not just the tail. Everything wagging. Pure, unfiltered joy that you came back. Like you've been gone for years instead of hours. Same home, same species caring for them. 2 animals that might even curl up on the same couch, but they might as well be from different planets. Here's the thing that's genuinely wild. These 2 creatures, cats and dogs, are both carnivores. They're actually related. If you go back far enough in evolutionary time, they share a common ancestor. Some ancient mammal prowling through forests that don't exist anymore. But somewhere along the way, their paths split. Not just split, diverged so completely that they became almost opposite solutions to the same problem. How to be a predator, how to survive, how to exist. And then, thousands of years ago, both of them ended up in our homes, living with humans, depending on us, but in completely fundamentally different ways. That's the mystery we're unraveling tonight. How did cats and dogs evolve so differently? Why does your dog lose its mind with happiness when you come home while your cat barely glances up from its nap? Why do dogs live for your approval and cats act like they're doing you a favor by existing in your presence? Why can you train a dog to do basically anything, but teaching a cat to come when called feels like negotiating with a tiny furry dictator? The answers aren't just interesting. They're buried in millions of years of evolutionary history, ancient forests where the first cat-like creatures learned to hunt alone, Ice Age plains where wolf packs developed strategies that required cooperation, trust, and something that looks a lot like loyalty. Strange environmental pressures that shaped bodies, rewired brains, and created 2 completely different ways of being a predator. If you're using this to fall asleep, perfect. That's exactly why I make these. Subscribe maybe, and tell me where you are and what time it is right now. I check the comments and it's fascinating. Tokyo at dawn, Austin at midnight, someone in Oslo at breakfast. All of us wondering about the same thing. Why our pets are the way they are. The journey we're about to take goes deep. We're talking 50 million years into the past, back to when the ancestors of modern carnivores were still figuring out what it meant to be a meat-eater. We'll watch as one branch of the family tree develops retractable claws and solitary hunting strategies. Another branch discovers that working together means taking down prey 10 times your size. We'll see how ice ages and shifting climates pushed these animals into different ecological niches, different survival strategies, different ways of thinking. And then we'll fast forward to something even stranger. The moment when humans entered the picture. Because here's what most people don't realize. Dogs didn't just get domesticated, they were transformed, reshaped by thousands of years of living alongside humans into something that barely resembles their wolf ancestors. But cats made a different bargain. They moved into our settlements, our farms, our homes, but they kept something wild, something untamed. They domesticated themselves, but only halfway. Tonight, we're going to understand why. We'll explore the anatomy that made cats into perfect solo assassins and dogs into endurance hunters that never give up. We'll dig into the psychology, the brain chemistry, the social structures that mean a dog sees you as family and a cat sees you as a useful roommate. Maybe. This isn't just a story about pets. It's a story about how evolution creates diversity, how the same starting point, carnivore, mammal, predator can branch into creatures so different they almost seem designed by different logic entirely. Two animals, two evolutionary paths, two completely different relationships with the species that eventually took over the planet. Let's find out how it happened. Go back far enough, and cats and dogs are the same thing, not similar, not related, the exact same creature. One species that would eventually split into two evolutionary paths so different they'd barely recognize each other as cousins. But we're not talking about thousands of years ago. We're talking about tens of millions of years, deep time so vast that continents have moved, oceans have opened and closed, and entire ecosystems have risen and fallen into dust. 50 million years ago, Earth was unrecognizable. No ice caps at the poles, no vast grasslands, no savannas. Instead, dense tropical forests stretch from pole to pole, thick canopies of plants that would seem alien to modern eyes. Palm trees grew in Alaska. Crocodiles swam in rivers where London would eventually stand. The planet was hot, humid, and absolutely teeming with life that had exploded into every available niche after the dinosaurs vanished 15 million years earlier. This was the age of mammals, small furry creatures that had spent 160 million years hiding in the shadows of the great reptiles were finally getting their chance, and they were diversifying at a rate that would have seemed impossible during the long reign of the dinosaurs. Within just 10 million years of the asteroid impact, mammals had evolved from mouse-sized generalists into creatures as large as modern bears. Some had taken to the water, becoming the first whales. Others had taken to the air as bats. And some had discovered something that would prove extraordinarily successful. Meat, not scavenging, not opportunistic protein gathering, specialized predation. The systematic hunting and killing of other mammals. This was new. During the age of dinosaurs, mammals had mostly been insectivores, crunching beetles and grubs in the underbrush. But now the world was full of herbivorous mammals, growing larger and more numerous every generation. And where there are herbivores, there's opportunity for predators. Enter Myiaces, a creature you've never heard of but whose descendants you probably live with. Myiaces was small, maybe the size of a modern weasel or small mongoose. It had a long body, short legs, and a long tail. If you saw one, you might think it looked vaguely cat-like, or maybe dog-like, or possibly weasel-like. And you'd be right on all counts, because Myiaces was the ancestor of all of them. Every carnivore alive today, every cat, every dog, every bear, every seal, every weasel, every raccoon, they all trace back to creatures very much like this modest forest dweller of 50 million years ago. But Myiaces wasn't alone. It was part of a whole radiation of early carnivorous mammals, all experimenting with different strategies for catching and killing prey in those dense prehistoric forests. Some climbed trees, developing sharp claws and flexible spines. Others stayed on the ground, developing powerful jaws and the stamina to pursue prey over longer distances. For millions of years, these different strategies coexisted within closely related populations. But around 42 million years ago, something shifted. The carnivore family tree split down the middle. One branch went one direction, the other went another, and the two would never converge again. Scientists call these two branches Feliformia and Caniformia, the cat-like carnivores and the dog-like carnivores. But here's what's important to understand. This wasn't about being cats or dogs yet. Those specific animals wouldn't evolve for tens of millions of years. This split was about something deeper, something more fundamental. It was about two completely different philosophies of predation, two different ways of solving the problem of how to be a successful hunter in a changing world. The Feliformia went one direction, toward specialization, toward solitary hunting, toward the perfection of the ambush. The Caniformia went another, toward flexibility, toward social hunting, toward endurance and cooperation. Neither strategy was better. Both were responding to real ecological pressures. Both would prove phenomenally successful, but they were incompatible strategies. You couldn't be a specialist and a generalist at the same time. You couldn't be a solitary ambush hunter and a cooperative endurance hunter simultaneously. Evolution had to choose. What caused the split? Nobody knows for certain. The fossil record from this period is frustratingly incomplete. We have fragments, hints, tantalizing pieces of evidence, but not the full picture. What we do know is that around this time the world was cooling. Those universal tropical forests were starting to fragment. Open woodlands were appearing where thick jungle had once stood. And with more open spaces came different prey behaviors. Herbivores that had relied on dense cover for protection now needed to watch for predators across greater distances. They became more alert, faster, harder to approach without being detected. Some carnivores responded by becoming even better at stealth, developing retractable claws that wouldn't click against rocks and alert prey, refining their senses to detect the slightest movement, learning to use cover so effectively they could get within striking distance of even the most vigilant herbivore. These were the Feliformia, beginning their long journey toward becoming the perfect ambush predators. Others responded differently. If prey was too alert to ambush reliably, then don't ambush. Chase, pursue. Develop the endurance to follow prey over long distances until exhaustion made escape impossible. And if one predator couldn't catch fast prey, then hunt in groups. Use cooperation to compensate for what you lack in stealth. These were the Caniformia, starting down the path that would eventually lead to wolves, to dogs, to the most socially sophisticated carnivores the world has ever seen. For millions of years after the split, both groups continued evolving in their respective directions. The fossil record shows increasing specialization on both sides. Feliform skeletons show increasingly flexible spines, retractable claws, specialized teeth for slicing through flesh with surgical precision. Caniform skeletons show changes too, but different ones. Longer legs relative to body size. Changes in foot structure that sacrificed climbing ability for endurance running. Slightly larger brain cases, possibly reflecting the cognitive demands of social hunting. By 25 million years ago, the two groups were becoming clearly distinguishable. If you could go back and watch them in the forests of the Oligocene epoch, you'd see the beginnings of familiar patterns, the Feliforms moving alone through the trees and undergrowth, patient and calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Caniforms moving in small groups, communicating with each other through vocalizations and body language, coordinating their movements to surround prey. But they weren't cats and dogs yet. They were their ancestors, the ancient templates from which those later species would emerge. Some of those ancient species were spectacular. Feliforms like Dinictis, with saber-like teeth, stalking horse-sized prey through North American forests. Caniforms like Amphision, the bear dog, a massive predator that might have hunted in packs or alone, we're still not sure. Most of these ancient carnivores are completely extinct now, entire branches of the evolutionary tree that flourished for millions of years before vanishing. But two branches kept going. Two branches through all the climate changes, asteroid impacts and mass extinctions that followed, kept adapting, kept evolving, kept surviving. One would eventually produce Felidae, the cat family. The other would produce Canidae, the dog family. And the differences between them, the differences that make your cat and your dog such radically different creatures, those differences trace back to this ancient split, to a choice made 42 million years ago by small weasel-like predators in forests that no longer exist, hunting prey whose fossils we're still discovering. Everything that came after, every difference in anatomy, behavior and psychology between cats and dogs, it all flows from this one divergence. Two paths into the future, two solutions to the problem of survival. and neither path knew what its descendants would eventually become. While the Caniformia were experimenting with cooperation, another branch of the carnivore family tree was going in the exact opposite direction. The Feliformia, cat-like carnivores, were discovering that sometimes the best hunting strategy isn't teamwork. Sometimes it's perfect, patient, solitary violence. Around 25 million years ago, give or take a few million years, the first true cats emerged. They weren't lions or tigers or anything you'd recognize from a modern zoo. They were small, probably weighing less than 20 pounds, with bodies already showing the fundamental architecture that would define all cats to come. But the blueprint was there. Retractable claws, flexible spine, forward-facing eyes calibrated for precise depth perception. These weren't animals built to chase prey across open grasslands for hours. These were animals built to wait, then explode. The ambush predator strategy seems simple on the surface. Hide, wait, strike. But making it work requires solving an entirely different set of evolutionary problems than pack hunting does. Pack hunters can afford to be seen. They rely on endurance, coordination, and overwhelming numbers to run down prey that might be faster or stronger than any individual hunter. Ambush predators have no such luxury. They get one chance, maybe a few seconds of explosive action. If they fail, the prey escapes, and all that patient waiting was for nothing. So evolution built cats like coiled springs. The flexible spine of a cat isn't just for show. It allows them to compress their entire body like a bow being drawn, storing mechanical energy in muscles and tendons. When they strike, they're not just jumping. They're releasing all that stored power in a single devastating burst. A cat can leap 6 times its body length from a standstill. Try doing that. You can't. Your spine won't bend that way. Your muscles aren't arranged for it. Then there are the claws. Retractable claws might seem like a small detail, but they represent a major evolutionary innovation. Dogs walk on their claws. They're always out, always being worn down by contact with the ground. This makes them useful for traction while running, but it also keeps them relatively dull. Cat claws retract into protective sheaths when not in use. This means they stay razor sharp. When a cat strikes, those claws deploy like switchblades, capable of penetrating hide and gripping struggling prey with devastating efficiency. But perhaps the most remarkable adaptation is what happened to cat vision. All mammals have eyes, obviously, but cat eyes are something special. They're huge relative to skull size. If human eyes were proportionally as large as cat eyes, they'd be the size of grapefruits. This isn't just for aesthetic appeal. Large eyes gather more light. They're essential for an ambush predator that does most of its hunting during dawn, dusk, and night when prey animals feel safest. Behind the lens, cats have a specialized layer of cells called the tapetum lucidum. It's basically a biological mirror that reflects light back through the retina, giving the photoreceptor cells a second chance to capture photons they might have missed the first time. This is what makes cat eyes glow in the dark. You're seeing light bouncing back out. The result is night vision so acute that cats can see in light conditions 6 times dimmer than what humans need. They can hunt in near darkness, attacking prey that literally cannot see them coming. The whiskers deserve attention too. They're not just decoration. Each whisker is embedded in tissue rich with nerve endings. Cats use them to measure gaps, detect air movements, and essentially create a 3-dimensional map of their immediate surroundings. In darkness, hunting through tall grass or dense undergrowth, a cat navigates more by whisker feedback than by vision. They can sense the presence of prey they can't even see yet, feel the disturbance in air pressure as something moves nearby. All these adaptations create a perfect ambush predator, but they also create something else, a solitary animal. Pack hunting requires social bonds, communication, a willingness to share resources. Ambush hunting requires none of that. In fact, having other hunters round is often counterproductive. They make noise. They give away your position. They might claim the kill you worked so hard to achieve. So cats became territorial. Not in the aggressive, border-patrolling way that wolf packs are territorial. More subtle, more chemical. Cats claim territories through scent marking, establishing overlapping ranges that they defend only against direct incursion. They can tolerate neighbours as long as everyone respects the boundaries. But within their territory, they hunt alone. They rely on no one. They share with no one. This psychology of independence was baked into cat evolution from the beginning. While wolves were learning to read each other's facial expressions and coordinate complex group behaviours, cats were learning to be self-sufficient. A cat kitten doesn't need to practice social integration. It needs to practice stalking, pouncing, the solitary skills that will keep it fed once it leaves its mother. But evolution wasn't finished experimenting with the feline form. Around 15 million years ago, the cat family tree split into multiple branches, each trying out different variations on the basic theme. Some cats stayed small, specializing in hunting rodents and birds. These would eventually give rise to the small wild cats that would, many millions of years later, become house cats. Others scaled up dramatically. The saber-toothed cats represent one of evolution's most dramatic experiments. Multiple lineages independently evolved elongated canine teeth, some reaching lengths of over 7 inches. These weren't piercing weapons. They were too long and thin for that. Instead, they were specialized slicing tools. Saber-tooths probably hunted by ambushing large prey, using their powerful neck muscles to drive those blade-like teeth deep into the throat or belly, then holding on while the prey bled out. It worked. Saber-toothed cats thrived for millions of years across multiple continents. Smilodon, the most famous saber-tooth, was built like a bear with a lion's head, capable of taking down prey as large as bison and young mammoths. But the strategy had limitations. Those huge teeth were fragile. Break one, and you were functionally crippled. And as the megafauna began declining due to climate change and human hunting, saber-tooth specialists found themselves increasingly without suitable prey. By 10,000 years ago, they were gone. Other cat lineages tried different approaches. The cheetah's ancestors developed longer legs and a more flexible spine, trading the raw power of the ambush for unprecedented speed. Modern cheetahs can hit 70 miles per hour in short bursts. They're the only cats that hunt primarily by pursuit rather than ambush, and they've paid for that specialization by becoming fragile. Cheetahs are nervous, easily injured, often have their kills stolen by more robust predators. Lions went the opposite direction, growing huge and, uniquely among cats, social. They're the exception that proves the rule. Lions developed pack hunting, but they did it much more recently than wolves, probably within the last million years, and even today lion social structures are loose compared to wolf packs. Males often live solitary lives except during mating. Female coalitions do most of the hunting. The social bonds are there, but they're always competing with the deep evolutionary programming toward independence. Most cats stayed true to the original plan. Stay medium-sized, stay solitary, perfect the ambush. This strategy proved remarkably successful. Cats spread across every continent except Antarctica and Australia. They adapted to jungles, grasslands, mountains, deserts, each environment selected for subtle variations. Desert cats like the sand cat developed fur-covered paws to insulate against hot sand and cold nights. Jungle cats like clouded leopards developed especially long tails for balance while navigating trees. Snow leopards grew thick coats and enlarged nasal cavities for breathing thin mountain air. But the core strategy remained unchanged. Hide, wait, strike. Rely on patience and explosive power rather than endurance and cooperation. The archaeological and fossil records show cats have been phenomenally successful with this approach. They've survived multiple ice ages, continental splits, climate upheavals that wiped out countless other species. There's something almost paradoxical about cat success. They're specialists, yet they're adaptable. They're solitary, yet they can survive in close proximity to other predators. They're ambush hunters, yet they can thrive in environments from dense forests to open deserts where hiding spots are scarce. Evolution built them with such fundamental efficiency that the same basic body plan works almost anywhere. The smaller wild cats, the lineage that would eventually give rise to domestic cats, exemplified this versatility. They emerged around 10 million years ago, weighing between 5 and 15 pounds, hunting primarily rodents and small birds. Their size meant they needed less food, could survive in territories that would starve a larger predator. They were too small to take down large prey, but that meant they weren't competing directly with lions, leopards, or the other big cats sharing their ranges. These small cats spread throughout Africa, Europe, and Asia, adapting to local conditions but remaining remarkably similar in behavior and psychology. Whether in African savannas or Middle Eastern deserts, they were solitary, territorial, crepuscular hunters. They maintained their independence while learning to tolerate proximity to other cats when resources were abundant. This was the animal that would eventually encounter humans, not a pack hunter looking for social bonds, not a desperate scavenger willing to trade freedom for scraps. A perfect self-sufficient predator that had spent 25 million years learning to need absolutely nothing from anyone. The cat's path through evolutionary time was the opposite of the dog's in almost every way. Where one lineage was learning cooperation, the other was perfecting independence. Where one was developing social intelligence, the other was honing individual hunting skills. Both strategies worked. Both produced apex predators, but they produced animals with fundamentally different relationships to the social world. And when humans finally became numerous enough, agricultural enough, settled enough to matter to cats, that difference would determine everything about how our relationships with these two carnivores would develop. Dogs would join us. Cats would make an entirely different arrangement. While the feliform carnivores were perfecting the art of solitary ambush, their cousins on the other side of the ancient split were writing a completely different evolutionary story. This is the tale of the Caniformia, and specifically the Canidae family, the lineage that would eventually give rise to wolves, foxes, jackals, and ultimately the animals sleeping at your feet right now. Around 34 million years ago, the first true canids emerged. The world they inhabited was vastly different from the one that had shaped the cats. Yes, there were still forests and dense vegetation, perfect territory for ambush predators. But the canids were evolving in more open landscapes, grasslands beginning to spread across continents, environments where hiding and pouncing wouldn't cut it. So they developed a different strategy entirely. If you can't hide from your prey, chase it. If you can't overpower it with a single killing bite, wear it down. If you can't do it alone, bring friends. This sounds simple, but it required a complete reimagining of what it meant to be a predator. Pursuit hunting, true endurance predation, demands an entirely different suite of adaptations than ambush hunting, and over millions of years natural selection began sculpting the canid body into something purpose-built for the long chase. Start with the claws. While felids were developing retractable claws that stayed sharp for that final killing grapple, canids went the opposite direction. Their claws became fixed, non-retractable, constantly worn down by contact with the ground. This might seem like a disadvantage until you consider what they gained. Those blunt, sturdy claws became traction devices, digging into earth and rock, providing grip during high-speed pursuits across varied terrain. A cat's retractable claws are like switchblades, perfect for close-quarters combat, A dog's fixed claws are like cleats, optimized for the marathon that is pursuit predation. Then there's the skull. Canids developed longer, narrower muzzles than their feliform cousins. This wasn't about aesthetics. A longer snout meant more surface area for olfactory receptors, enhanced scent processing capabilities that would prove crucial for tracking prey across vast distances. It also changed the biomechanics of the bite. While cats evolved for the crushing, killing bite to the neck or skull, canids developed gripping and tearing capabilities. Their jaw muscles and tooth arrangement became optimized for grabbing prey, holding on during a struggle, inflicting multiple wounds rather than one perfect killing strike. But the most remarkable adaptation was invisible from the outside. Cardiovascular efficiency, respiratory capacity, thermoregulation. The entire canid body became a machine designed for sustained exertion. Their hearts and lungs evolved to process oxygen with remarkable efficiency. They developed the ability to pant, using evaporative cooling to regulate body temperature even during extended pursuits in hot conditions. This is what felids largely lack. A cheetah can hit 70 miles per hour, but only for seconds before overheating forces it to stop. A wolf can maintain a steady pace for hours, covering dozens of miles without rest. This endurance hunting strategy opened up prey options that would have been impossible for solitary ambush predators. Large ungulates, animals too big and powerful for a single predator to bring down safely, became viable targets when you could chase them to exhaustion and attack as a coordinated group. But here's where things get really interesting. This hunting strategy didn't just require physical adaptations, it demanded a complete restructuring of canid social behavior and psychology. You can't coordinate a complex group hunt if you're a solitary creature. Pack hunting requires communication, cooperation, role specialization, the ability to predict what your packmates will do and adjust your own behavior accordingly. Over millions of years, natural selection began favoring canids with enhanced social cognitive abilities. The ability to read subtle body language in other pack members, the capacity to understand dominance hierarchies and maintain stable social relationships. Most critically, the development of what we might call theory of mind, the ability to understand that other individuals have their own knowledge, intentions, and perspectives. This is where canids began diverging not just physically, but cognitively from their feliform relatives. Cats can certainly learn, solve problems, even form social bonds, but they evolved as fundamentally independent operators. Their survival never depended on understanding what another cat was thinking, or coordinating complex activities with other individuals. Dogs evolved under completely different selection pressures. A wolf that couldn't read pack social dynamics, that couldn't anticipate the actions of its hunting partners, that couldn't communicate its own intentions effectively, that wolf wouldn't last long. It would be excluded from hunts, denied access to kills, possibly driven from the pack entirely. Over generations, this created intense selection for social intelligence. Archaeological and genetic evidence suggests that by around 10 million years ago, the canid family had diversified into multiple distinct lineages, each adapting to different environmental niches, but all maintaining that fundamental pack hunting, socially cooperative base. Some lineages became larger, like the ancestors of modern wolves and their relatives. These animals pushed pack hunting to its most sophisticated extreme, developing the ability to take down prey many times their individual size through coordinated group tactics. Other lineages went smaller, like the ancestors of foxes. Interestingly, many fox species became less social, more solitary. This shows that canid sociality wasn't locked in, it was adaptable, shaped by environmental conditions. In habitats where prey was small and scattered, solitary hunting became more efficient. But even these more independent canids retained enhanced social cognitive abilities compared to cats. They simply deployed those abilities differently. Then there were the truly specialized pack hunters like the ancestors of African wild dogs. These animals took cooperative hunting to an almost eusocial extreme. Wild dog packs function like superorganisms, with elaborate food-sharing systems, cooperative pup rearing where the entire pack helps raise young, and hunting coordination so sophisticated that researchers describe it as almost telepathic. Of course, it's not telepathy. It's the product of millions of years of selection for social cohesion and communication. Now, this social lifestyle created both vulnerabilities and extraordinary strengths. The vulnerability is obvious. A solitary cat that loses its territory can move to new hunting grounds relatively easily. A wolf separated from its pack faces serious survival challenges. Young wolves dispersing from their birth packs to find mates and establish new territories often die during this vulnerable period. Social carnivores are dependent on their groups in ways solitary predators simply aren't. But the strength of social living proved overwhelming. Pack hunters could bring down prey that solitary predators couldn't touch. They could defend larger territories more effectively. Perhaps most importantly, they could share information across generations with remarkable fidelity. A young wolf doesn't just learn hunting techniques through trial and error. It learns by watching experienced pack members, by participating in hunts under the guidance of adults, by being taught through a systematic process that looks remarkably like education. This cultural transmission of knowledge created a kind of accelerated adaptation. Packs could develop specialized hunting techniques for local prey species and pass those techniques down through generations, allowing rapid adaptation to changing conditions without waiting for genetic evolution. Some wolf packs learned to hunt bison using specific coordinated tactics. Others specialized in caribou, developing completely different strategies suited to their prey's behavior. This cultural diversity within a single species was unprecedented among carnivores. The cognitive demands of this lifestyle were extraordinary. A successful pack hunter needed to track prey across vast distances, often relying on scent trails hours old. They needed to understand pack hierarchy well enough to avoid constant conflict, but also flexible enough to work cooperatively during hunts despite those hierarchical tensions. They needed to communicate complex information, not just simple emotions but intentions, discoveries, strategies. And they needed to form deep emotional bonds, the kind of attachments that would motivate individuals to sacrifice their own safety for pack mates. This last point deserves emphasis. Pack hunting only works if individual pack members are willing to take risks for the collective good. The wolves that drive prey toward an ambush face danger themselves while other pack members get the safer position. This requires trust, emotional connection, the kind of bonds that motivate individuals to act against their immediate self-interest for the group's benefit. Natural selection solved this problem by making wolves capable of profound emotional attachment. They didn't just tolerate pack mates, they bonded with them, experienced distress when separated, joy when reunited, grief when pack members died. This capacity for deep social bonding would prove absolutely crucial millions of years later when wolves encountered a strange bipedal ape that was also a social hunter, also dependent on group cooperation, also capable of complex communication and cultural knowledge transmission. But that meeting was still far in the future. For millions of years, canids continued evolving, spreading across continents, adapting to environments from Arctic tundra to tropical forests. Some lineages went extinct as climates changed and prey populations shifted. Others thrived, diversified, pushed into new ecological niches. By about 2 million years ago, the lineage that would become modern wolves had emerged. Larger than most other canids, capable of taking down massive prey like moose and bison, highly social, cognitively sophisticated. They were spreading across the northern hemisphere, following the great herds of Ice Age megafauna, and they were about to encounter something unprecedented. Another social hunter with remarkably similar survival strategies. Another species that hunted in coordinated groups, shared food, cared cooperatively for young, used complex communication, and depended on cultural knowledge transmission. Humans and wolves were collision course, two pack-hunting apex predators competing for the same territories and the same prey. By all the usual rules of ecology, this should have ended in competition, conflict, one species driving the other to extinction in overlapping ranges. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. Something that would change both species forever and create a relationship unlike anything else in the natural world. But that meeting, and the transformation it triggered, would reshape not just wolves, but the entire trajectory of human civilization itself. Pick up a cat, feel its weight, maybe 8 or 10 pounds of muscle and bone that somehow feels both substantial and weightless at the same time. Now try to hold a similarly sized dog, same weight, completely different feeling. The dog feels solid, grounded, like it's made of denser stuff. There's a reason for that. These animals were built by evolution for completely different kinds of warfare, and every bone, every muscle, every sensory organ tells that story. Start with the spine. The feline backbone is one of evolution's most remarkable engineering achievements. Where a dog's spine is relatively rigid, built for stability and endurance, a cat's spine contains more vertebrae, and the spaces between them are cushioned with elastic discs that act like shock absorbers and springs combined. This isn't just flexibility. This is mechanical magic. A cat can rotate its spine nearly 180 degrees. It can compress its body to fit through any opening its head can pass through. Most incredibly, it can use that spine like a coiled spring, storing elastic energy and releasing it in explosive jumps that can launch the animal 5 times its body height from a standing position. Watch a cat run, and you're seeing that spine in action. It flexes and extends with each stride, effectively lengthening the animal's reach by several inches. The cat isn't just running, it's flowing across the ground like liquid muscle. This was crucial for an ambush predator. You get 1 chance, maybe 2, to catch prey before it escapes. You need acceleration that goes from 0 to maximum in less than a second. That flexible spine provided it. Dogs evolved something different entirely. Their spines are comparative rigid, built for a different kind of speed. Not explosive acceleration, but sustained pursuit. A wolf's backbone is designed to absorb the repeated impact of hours-long chases across rough terrain. Less flexibility means more stability when you're running mile after a caribou that's trying desperately to outlast you. The dog sacrificed the cat's acrobatic abilities for something more valuable to a pack hunter, the ability to keep running when everyone else is exhausted. The skeletal differences extend to every part of their frames. Cat leg bones are relatively light, designed to minimize the energy cost of those explosive movements. Dog bones are denser, heavier, built to withstand constant stress over long periods. It's the difference between a sports car and a long-haul truck. Both are impressive, but they're solving completely different problems. Then there are the claws. This might be the most dramatic anatomical difference between the two lineages. Cat claws are curved, razor-sharp, and most remarkably retractable. When not in use, they're pulled back into protective sheaths, keeping them sharp and preventing them from making noise when the cat stalks. These are weapons, pure and simple, curved for gripping and tearing, sharp enough to pierce hide and muscle, positioned on paws that can swivel and grasp like hands. A cat's front paws are killing tools designed over millions of years of evolution. Watch a cat manipulate an object and you're seeing modified hands, They can grasp, hold, even throw things with those front paws. This dexterity was essential for solitary hunters who had to handle prey alone, without packmates to help hold down a struggling meal. The claws hook in, the paw pads provide grip, and the flexible wrist allows the cat to manipulate its catch with precision that would make a surgeon envious. Dog claws tell a completely different story. They're fixed, non-retractable, thick, and blunt. They're not weapons. They're tools for traction, digging, and breaking. A running wolf needs claws that bite into soil and ice, providing purchase during high-speed chases and sudden turns. The claws wear down constantly from contact with the ground, but that's fine because they're not meant to stay sharp. They're meant to be tough and functional, like climbing spikes on boots. This difference shaped everything about how these animals move through the world. Cats walk on their toes, keeping their claws ready but protected. Dogs walk on their toes too, but their claws are always in contact with the ground, providing constant feedback about terrain and traction. It's like comparing a knife fighter to a marathon runner. Both are deadly effective, but in completely different ways. The sensory worlds these animals inhabit are so different, they might as well be living in separate realities. Start with the eyes. Cats have the eyes of twilight hunters. Their pupils can dilate to enormous size, letting in maximum light during dawn and dusk hunting hours. Behind the retinae, they have a reflective layer called the tapetum lucidum that bounces light back through the photoreceptors, effectively giving every photon 2 chances to be detected. This is why cat eyes shine in the dark. You're seeing reflected light that the cat's visual system has already processed once. But there's a trade-off. Cats sacrificed colour vision for light sensitivity. They can see some colours, blues and yellows mostly, but their world is not as vibrant as ours or a dog's. They don't need colour to hunt. They need motion detection, and their visual system is optimized for spotting the slightest movement. A cat can detect a mouse twitching from 50 feet away in near darkness. That's what evolution selected for. Dogs evolved different eyes for different work. They retained better colour vision than cats, probably because pack hunters benefiting from being able to distinguish subtle environmental cues that might indicate where prey has passed. Their pupils don't dilate as extremely as cat pupils, but they're positioned differently in the skull. Dog eyes are set more forward than cat eyes, providing better binocular vision, better depth perception. This matters when you're chasing prey over rough terrain at high speed. You need to judge distances accurately or you're going to break a leg in a hole. But the real sensory superpower of dogs isn't vision, it's smell. The canine nose is one of evolution's most sophisticated chemical detectors. Dogs have up to 300 million olfactory receptors in their noses, compared to about 200 million in cats and maybe 6 million in humans. But it's not just quantity. The canine brain dedicates about 40 times more processing power to analysing smells than the human brain does. Dogs don't just smell things, they analyse them, building 3-dimensional scent maps of their environment that persist over time. A dog can smell where a rabbit was 10 minutes ago and determine which direction it went. They can smell fear, illness, even changes in blood sugar in diabetic humans. Some researchers think dogs experience smell the way we experience vision, as a rich, detailed model of the world that updates constantly. To a dog, every passing car leaves a signature scent that tells a story about where it's been and what it's been near. Cats have excellent noses too, much better than humans, but they're not in the same category as dogs. Cats rely more on other senses. Their whiskers, for instance, are incredibly sensitive motion and air pressure detectors. A cat can navigate in complete darkness using only its whiskers, sensing the movement of air around objects and building a tactile map of its surroundings. They also have a special scent organ called the Jacobson's organ in the roof of their mouth. When you see a cat make that strange grimacing expression called phlegmon response, mouth open, lips pulled back, They're pulling air over this organ to analyze chemical signals, especially pheromones. The differences extend to hearing. Both cats and dogs can hear higher frequencies than humans, but cats have the edge. They can detect ultrasonic sounds up to 79 kHz, well into the range that mice and other small prey use to communicate. Those large rotatable ears act like radar dishes, capable of independent movement. A cat can point one ear forward and one back simultaneously, monitoring threats from multiple directions while staying focused on prey. Dogs hear well too, up to about 45 kHz, but their hearing is optimized for different purposes. Pack hunters need to detect the vocalizations of pack mates over long distances. Dog ears are extremely good at determining the direction and distance of sounds, essential for coordinated hunting when pack members are spread across a large area. Inside these animals, the differences continue. Cat digestive systems are those of hypercarnivores, animals that derive more than 70% of their nutrition from meat. Their intestines are relatively short for their body size. They don't need the long, complex digestive tract that herbivores and omnivores require to break down plant matter. Cats can't taste sweetness. They lack the genetic machinery to produce the taste receptor for sweet compounds. Why would they need it? For millions of years, their ancestors ate nothing but meat. Even more remarkably, cats have lost the ability to produce certain essential nutrients from precursors. They can't convert beta-carotene to vitamin A the way dogs and humans can. They can't synthesize taurine from other amino acids. They must get these nutrients directly from animal tissue. This isn't a deficiency, it's an optimization. Evolution stripped away unnecessary metabolic pathways, streamlining the cat's physiology for maximum efficiency on an all-meat diet. Dogs retained more omnivorous capabilities. Their digestive systems are longer, more complex. They can digest starches and plant materials reasonably well, a trait that wolves probably developed to supplement their diet during lean times when prey was scarce. This flexibility would later prove crucial for domestication. Dogs could share human food, including grains and vegetables. Cats needed meat, period. The muscle fibers in these animals tell the same story of different evolutionary strategies. Cats are loaded with fast-twitch muscle fibers, the kind that provide explosive power but fatigue quickly. A cat at full sprint is one of nature's most impressive displays of power-to-weight ratio, but it can only maintain that speed for a few seconds, maybe 30 seconds maximum before exhaustion sets in. Every muscle fiber is optimized for that one explosive moment, the pounce that must succeed or the hunt is over. Dogs have more slow-twitch endurance fibers. A healthy dog can trot for hours without significant fatigue. Wolves have been documented maintaining pursuit of prey for 8 hours or more, covering 50 miles in a single hunt. That's endurance that would kill a cat. But a dog can't match a cat's explosive acceleration or the raw power of that ambush strike. Even their brains evolve differently. Brain imaging studies show that dogs have much larger brain regions dedicated to social cognition. The areas that process facial expressions, interpret vocalizations, and model the mental states of others are significantly expanded in canines. This makes sense for pack animals that must constantly negotiate social hierarchies and coordinate complex group behaviors. Cats have relatively larger brain regions dedicated to sensory processing and motor control. Their brains are optimized for integrating sensory data and executing precise, complex movements. A cat's ability to land on its feet when falling, adjusting its body position in mid-air through a sequence of complex rotations, requires extraordinary sensory motor integration. The jaw structures reveal the final piece of the puzzle. Cat jaws are short and powerful, with massive muscles that can generate incredible bite force relative to their size. Their canine teeth are long, pointed daggers designed for the killing bite, that precise strike to the back of the prey's neck that severs the spinal cord. The rest of their teeth are specialized for shearing meat, with carnassial teeth that work like scissors to slice through muscle and sinew. Dog jaws are longer, providing more leverage for crushing bones and maintaining grip on struggling prey. Their bite is less about precision and more about holding power. A wolf locks its jaws on prey and doesn't let go, letting the pack bring down the animal through sustained pressure and blood loss. Dog teeth are more varied, with molars capable of grinding as well as canines for gripping, and incisors for cutting. Every difference tells the same story. These animals were forged by evolution for completely different survival strategies. One became a solitary precision instrument, optimized for the perfect ambush. The other became a social endurance hunter, built for cooperation and persistence. Neither approach was better. Both were brilliantly successful, but they created animals so fundamentally different that when humans eventually encountered them, the relationships that developed would be completely unlike each other. The stage was set. The players were ready. Now they just needed to meet. Picture the landscape. Not the world you know, but the Pleistocene Eurasia of 40,000 years ago. Ice sheets covering everything north of modern Berlin. Grasslands stretching for hundreds of miles where forests would later grow. And cold. Not the cold of a winter morning, the cold of a planet locked in glacial cycles that could freeze rivers solid for months at a time. In this world, humans were still the new kids on the evolutionary block. Modern humans had only recently left Africa, spreading across Asia and Europe, encountering landscapes their ancestors had never seen. They were smart, adaptable, capable of sophisticated planning and cooperation. But they were also small, relatively weak, and competing with predators that had millions of years of evolutionary refinement for killing in these exact conditions. Among those predators were wolves, not the romantic creatures of modern mythology, but apex predators perfectly adapted to Ice Age hunting. Larger than most modern wolves, possibly weighing 150 pounds or more. Pack hunters capable of taking down massive prey like bison, horses and young mammoths. They'd been dominating these landscapes for hundreds of thousands of years before humans showed up. And somehow, impossibly, these two species, humans and wolves, began one of the most consequential partnerships in the history of life on Earth. Nobody knows exactly how it started. That's the frustrating thing about trying to understand domestication. The process doesn't leave clear archaeological signatures. No ancient human wrote down the moment they first invited a wolf to their campfire. We have to reconstruct everything from fragmentary evidence, genetic analysis, and educated guessing about behaviors that left no direct fossil record. But we have theories, lots of them, and the fascinating thing is that they're all plausible, all consistent with what we know about human and wolf behavior, which probably means the truth involves elements of all of them. The oldest theory is intentional domestication, the idea that humans deliberately captured wolf pups, raised them in captivity, and gradually bred the tamest individuals over many generations. It's a nice story, very human-centric, fits with our self-image as shapers of nature. But it has problems. First, timing. If humans were intentionally domesticating wolves, we'd expect to see a relatively rapid transition from wild wolves to proto-dogs in the archaeological record. But that's not what we see. The evidence shows a long, gradual process spanning thousands, possibly tens of thousands of years. That's a lot of generations for an intentional breeding program. Second, behavior. Wolf pups raised in captivity, even from the earliest age, don't act like dogs. Modern experiments have shown that wolves, even after many generations of captive breeding, retain wild behaviors that make them dangerous and unpredictable around humans. Something more than just selective breeding of tame individuals must have been involved. That's where the second theory comes in, self-domestication. The idea that wolves domesticated themselves by learning to exploit a new ecological niche created by human settlements. This theory has gained a lot of traction in recent years because it fits what we know about wolf behavior and the archaeological timeline. Here's how it might have worked. Humans in the Ice Age were messy. They left food scraps, discarded bones, waste from processing animals. This created a ring of resources around human camps that attracted scavengers. Most animals approached cautiously, grabbed what they could, and fled. But wolves are intelligent, social animals capable of learning and adapting. Some individual wolves figured out that humans weren't particularly dangerous if approached carefully. These wolves could access food resources with less effort than hunting, especially during harsh winters when prey was scarce. The key insight is that this wasn't about wolves becoming tame. It was about natural selection favoring individuals who could tolerate human presence. Wolves who were less aggressive, less fearful, more curious about humans had a survival advantage. They got more food with less risk, they reproduced more successfully, and they passed on whatever genetic variants made them capable of that tolerance. Over hundreds of generations, this created a population of wolves that looked and acted different from their wild cousins. Not because humans were selectively breeding them, but because the environment around human settlement selected for different traits. Tameness became an evolutionary strategy. But there's a third possibility that's even more interesting: mutual cooperation. The idea that humans and wolves recognized benefits in working together and actively maintained relationships that served both species. Think about it from the human perspective. You're living in Ice Age Eurasia. You're an excellent hunter, but you have limitations. Your sense of smell is terrible compared to most predators. Your hearing is mediocre. You can't run particularly fast or for very long. You're most effective in daylight, but many prey animals are active at dawn, dusk, or night. You're surrounded by dangerous predators that can kill you in seconds. Now imagine having partners who can smell prey from miles away, hear the slightest movement, run at sustained speeds for hours, and see perfectly in low light. Partners who can track wounded animals through terrain where you'd quickly lose the trail. Partners who can guard your camp at night, alerting you to dangers before they arrive. From the wolf perspective, the benefits are equally clear. Humans have technology. We can make weapons that kill at a distance. We can create fire, which provides warmth and protection from other predators. We can process foods that wolves can't easily access on their own. We can provide shelter and care when wolves are injured or sick. A partnership between humans and wolves would be incredibly powerful, more powerful than either species alone, and there's archaeological evidence this happened. The challenge is pinning down when. The genetic evidence is messy. DNA analysis of modern dogs suggests they diverged from wolves somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years ago. That's a huge range, 25,000 years of uncertainty. Different studies using different methodologies come up with different answers. The fossil evidence is equally problematic. We have canid skulls from 30,000 years ago that show features intermediate between wolves and dogs, shorter snouts, wider skulls, smaller teeth. But are these early dogs, or just unusual wolves? Without soft tissue, without behaviour, it's hard to say definitively. The oldest generally accepted evidence of domesticated dogs comes from around 15,000 years ago. Burials where humans and dogs were interred together, suggesting the kind of emotional bond that characterizes the modern human-dog relationship. But many researchers think the relationship goes back much further, possibly twice that age or more. What we do know is that wolves were uniquely suited for this transformation. Other canids, coyotes, jackals, foxes all proved much more resistant to domestication. Even today, after thousands of years of human experience with animal husbandry, it's nearly impossible to domesticate a fox or coyote. They retain wild behaviours no matter how carefully they're bred. Wolves succeeded where other canids failed because of their social structure. Wolves are pack animals with complex hierarchies and sophisticated communication. They're capable of recognizing individuals, forming long-term bonds, and coordinating behavior toward shared goals. These are exactly the traits needed to integrate into human social groups. They also have something called neoteny, the retention of juvenile characteristics into adulthood. Wolf pups are curious, playful, eager to please, and responsive to social cues. Adult wolves lose most of these traits as they mature, but some individuals, probably those with particular genetic variants, retained more juvenile behaviors. These individuals would have been most successful in the human-adjacent niche, and natural selection would have amplified these traits over generations. This is why modern dogs look and act like juvenile wolves. The floppy ears, the playful behavior, the eagerness to interact with humans, these are all neotenic traits that were selected for during domestication. We didn't create them intentionally. Evolution created them by favouring individuals who could successfully navigate life alongside humans. But the transformation wasn't one-sided. There's growing evidence that the partnership with wolves changed humans too. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies who live with dogs show dramatically higher hunting success rates. Groups with dogs can track and kill prey much more efficiently than groups without them. They can travel farther, explore more territory, and defend themselves more effectively against predators. This suggests that humans who partnered with wolves had significant survival advantages over humans who didn't, which means natural selection would have favoured humans who were good at maintaining those partnerships. Humans who could read canine body language, who had the patience to work with animals, who recognised the strategic value of cross-species cooperation. Over thousands of generations, this would have made us better at domestication generally. The skills we developed working with wolves transferred to other animals. The sheep, goats, cattle, pigs and horses that would later become the foundation of agriculture were all domesticated by humans who had already spent millennia perfecting the art of partnership with another species. In a very real sense, wolves taught us how to domesticate. They were the test case, the prototype, the proof that humans and animals could work together for mutual benefit. Everything that came after, all of human civilization that depends on domesticated animals, might not have been possible without that first partnership in the Ice Age cold. And it was still just beginning. What happened next would transform wolves even more dramatically. The story of how one species became dozens of breeds, each shaped for specific purposes, each carrying the genetic legacy of those first wolves who dared to approach human campfires 40,000 years ago. But before we get there, we need to understand a very different story. Because while wolves were learning to live alongside humans, another group of carnivores was watching from a distance, calculating, waiting, pursuing a strategy that would prove equally successful but completely different in execution. Imagine the world is already full of dogs, not the fluffy couch companions you know, but half wolves, half something else, padding around the edges of human camps. The great partnership between people and pack hunters is well underway. For tens of thousands of years, humans and proto-dogs have been reshaping each other, learning to read each other's faces, sounds and movements. And in all that time, cats are nowhere. No village tigers, no tame lynxes, no purring leopards lying by the fire. For most of human history, the feline world and the human world run in parallel, rarely crossing, barely noticing each other. Big cats stalk people as prey. Smaller wild cats skirt the edge of human awareness, ghost-like, mostly at night. If dogs joined us by following our footsteps across ice and steppe, cats will wait for a very different moment. They are not interested in hunter-gatherers. They are waiting for barns. To see why, you have to move the clock forward, way forward. Not 100,000 years, not even 40,000. You move to a relatively recent past in evolutionary terms, 10, maybe 12,000 years ago, just as the last ice age is fading and the world is rearranging itself once again. You find yourself in a different landscape now, not endless, migrating herds, but patches of something new. Fields. You're in the Fertile Crescent, a band of land arcing from the Nile Valley through the Levant, curving over Mesopotamia, down towards the Persian Gulf. Rivers like the Nile, the Jordan, the Euphrates, and the Tigris swell with seasonal rains and snowmelt. Floodplains leave behind rich silt. People who once followed wild grains and wild gazelles begin to try a different strategy. They stay, they plant, they wait. The agricultural revolution is not a single event. It's a slow, hesitant experiment repeated in valley after valley. Some groups scatter seeds from wild wheat and barley near their camps. Others start tending stands of grain, weeding, guarding, learning by careful, patient failure what works and what doesn't. Over generations, they coax plants to depend on them, just as wolves once learned to depend on discarded bones. And with the birth of farming, a new kind of ecology appears around humans, an artificial ecosystem. Granaries, simple at first, just pits lined with clay or baskets stacked under thatched roofs, begin to accumulate what no hunter-gatherer camp ever had in such abundance: concentrated, stationary calories. To a human, this is security. To a rodent, this is paradise. Slowly, quietly, the grain calls. Mice, rats, and other small mammals move in. They can smell the seed. They can gnaw through mud brick, through thatch, through woven walls. At night, while people sleep, they come in numbers that no one has seen before. Each pair can become dozens. Each dozen can become hundreds. For the first farmers, this is a problem that looks almost like a curse. You work all year, and when you finally have enough food to last through the dry season, an army of little teeth threatens to take it all away. But for another predator watching from the edges of this new world, it looks like an opportunity so good it borders on impossible. Because there is one creature perfectly built over millions of years for the job of hunting small, fast, nervous things in tall grass. A small wildcat, Felis sylvestris libica, living across parts of the Near East and North Africa. Solitary hunter. Night vision like liquid green fire. Reflexes wired for ambush. And it discovers the human village the same way wolves might once have discovered human camps, by following the food. Not our food exactly. The food that steals our food. At first the relationship is nothing. A shadow flickers along a granary wall. Something screams in the dark and then goes silent. The next morning, there are fewer bite marks in the grain stores. Humans notice, but only in the vaguest way. Some nights are better than others. Some villages lose less grain. Over time, a pattern emerges. Where the wildcats hunt, the rats are fewer. In those places, people go just a little less hungry. This is the cat's bargain beginning to take shape. Dogs joined us as social partners, slowly selected for friendliness, trainability, the ability to fit into a human pack. We shaped them, generation by generation, picking the least fearful wolves, the most attentive, the most responsive. Cats come to us along a different path. We do not invite them in. They invite themselves. A few wild cats begin to tolerate being closer to humans than their cousins. Maybe they realize that people, noisy and clumsy as they are, scare off larger predators that would otherwise threaten the cats. Maybe they discover that granaries are safe places to hunt. The wildcats that are less skittish, less likely to bolt at the sight of a human silhouette, have access to more prey, less danger, better territory. Natural selection does the rest. Without any conscious plan from either side, a new niche appears. Cats that are not fully wild but not owned, Animals that float around the perimeter of human settlements, loosely attached to us by a thread made of rodents and shelter. People begin to notice these hunters more clearly. A wildcat that hangs around the village and doesn't immediately flee might find scraps tossed vaguely in its direction, not as a reward in the way we train dogs, but almost as an unspoken acknowledgement. You can stay. The relationship is mutual benefit, not obedience. When the dogs fail to guard the camp properly, humans scold them, hit them, tie them short. When the cat fails to catch rodents, nothing happens. It simply goes hungry or moves on. If dogs were apprentices in a human-designed school for cooperation, cats are contractors. They show up, do the job, then leave when it suits them. This is why biologists and archaeologists often refer to cats as semi-domesticated. Their path into our lives is not driven mainly by deliberate breeding, but by self-selection. The cats that thrive near humans are those with slightly different temperaments, less fearful, a bit more tolerant of crowding, maybe more flexible in their social behaviour. Over thousands of years, that is enough to carve a subtle but real line between the Near Eastern wildcat and what we now call the domestic cat, Felis catus. But the key word here is subtle. When scientists compare the DNA of modern house cats with their wild relatives, the differences are strikingly small. No equivalent of the sweeping genetic transformation we see in dogs, whose skulls, coats, digestive systems, and even reproductive cycles bear the stamp of deep human interference. Most domestic cats can still breed freely with Near Eastern wildcats and produce fertile offspring. Their body shape, hunting patterns, and general behaviour are shockingly similar. In terms of genetics, cats hover right at the border of wild and domesticated territory. In a sense, they are part-time citizens of our world, part-time citizens of a much older, quieter kingdom. Bones from ancient settlements in the Fertile Crescent and later in Anatolia, Cyprus and Egypt tell the same story. At first, wildcats appear as rare guests near human communities. Over time they become more frequent, more tightly associated with granaries. One grave in Cyprus, around 9,500 years old, holds a human buried with a young cat placed carefully beside them. Maybe a pet, maybe a symbol, maybe both. By the time you reach the great river civilizations, the cat's bargain has evolved into something more elaborate. In Egypt, cats stalk between clay houses and temple courtyards. They still hunt, killing snakes as well as rodents, protecting grain, protecting people. Their usefulness is obvious, but over time a different layer begins to wrap around them. Symbolism. The Egyptians seem to fall in love. They carve cats into amulets, paint them in murals, mummify them by the thousands. Goddesses like Bastet take on feline form, embodying both protection and ferocity. Harming a cat can be a serious offence. For a time, their status verges on sacred. But even here, the relationship is unusual. Nobody is training cats to herd animals or pull loads or guard palaces on command. Nobody is systematically breeding them for size or colour in a way that leaves a huge genetic fingerprint. Cats remain themselves, hunters, mostly nocturnal, affectionate when they choose, aloof when they don't. The Egyptian cat is honoured, but not re-engineered. When later cultures inherit the cat, they inherit this ambiguity. In Greece and Rome, cats are appreciated as practical hunters and occasional companions, but never quite climb to the same divine heights. They drift around ports and warehouses, slipping in and out of myth and reality, sometimes associated with goddesses, sometimes just treated as living tools with sharp teeth. Then, in medieval Europe, the narrative darkens. Superstition curls around felines. Their night habits, reflective eyes, and independent nature make them easy targets for fear. In some times and places, cats, especially black ones, are linked to witchcraft, bad luck, malign forces. Periodic persecutions break out. They are killed, driven away, treated with suspicion. Ironically, this hostility sometimes has consequences that echo all the way into epidemiology. Fewer cats hunting rodents can mean more rats in crowded medieval cities. More rats can mean more fleas carrying diseases. In a quiet, indirect way, rejecting the cat's bargain may have helped amplify plagues. Yet the cat does what it always does. It waits at the margins. It survives. By the early modern period, attitudes soften again. In ports, ships carry cats as professional pest controllers, keeping grain and rope safe from gnawing mouths. In farmhouses and city homes, cats work the same job they've had since the dawn of agriculture, now with occasional access to hearthsides and laps. Even now, as electricity hums through modern apartments, and most people never see a granary, that ancient job description has not disappeared. Many cats still stalk pests in barns, alleyways and warehouses. Even indoor cats practice the motions in play, pouncing on toys as if they were mice between stalks of wheat. Today, their cultural role has shifted into something stranger and more global. They are icons. Internet platforms overflow with cats, sleeping, falling, glaring, being unexpectedly affectionate. Their puzzling mixture of aloofness and sudden warmth taps into something in us that even we don't fully understand. We project onto them mystery, independence, tiny royal arrogance, and underneath the humour and the memes, that old bargain is still visible if you look closely. We provide the environment, shelter, food, warmth. They bring a kind of wildness into our carefully constructed world, a reminder of the solitary hunter that never entirely went away. When a dog looks at you, it often seems to be asking, what are we doing together? What's next? How can I be part of this? When a cat looks at you, it often feels more like a quiet accounting. You, me, this place, the food bowl, the door. The rules are different. It is not that one species loves us and the other does not. Love is a complicated word for cross-species relationships layered over thousands of years of mutual advantage. But the structures underneath those relationships are different. Dogs were pulled toward us, and then pushed, nudged, sculpted into shapes we found useful and endearing. Cats moved toward us only when we had built something that fit their needs. They changed themselves only as much as they had to, keeping one paw firmly planted in the wild. In that sense, domestication for cats is less a surrender and more a treaty. They accepted our world on their own terms. They entered our houses without ever fully leaving their ancestral kingdom of silent steps and sudden motion. They remain among the least altered of our companion animals, genetically and behaviourally, even as they curl on laptops and stroll across city windowsills. When you fall asleep with a cat at the edge of your bed, you're sharing your night with a creature that made a decision, long ago, at the edge of a field in the Fertile Crescent, not to become what we wanted, but to become what suited them. And because of that, because they domesticated themselves rather than being domesticated by us, they continue to feel like ambassadors from another world, a world that only partly overlaps with ours, a world that existed long before the first granary and will likely continue in some form long after the last. The dog that sleeps at the foot of your bed tonight is not a wolf in any simple sense. It's the product of tens of thousands of years of quiet experiments, most of them unconscious, carried out by one very strange primate. US. When wolves first slipped into the flickering circle of human firelight, they still looked like wolves. Upright ears, narrow faces, long legs, wary eyes that vanished into the dark whenever someone moved too quickly. But once that relationship stabilized, once the truce between hunter and scavenger turned into a partnership, evolution took a hard left turn, and it did something peculiar. If you lined up the earliest domesticated dogs next to their wild cousins, the differences at first would have been subtle, maybe slightly shorter snouts, maybe a bit smaller overall, maybe less fear when a human reached for a leftover bone. But over generations, as humans kept, bred and favoured the friendliest animals, a whole suite of unexpected traits began to appear. Ears that drooped instead of standing alert, tails that curled like question marks over their backs, coats that came in patches and spots and splashes of colour no self-respecting wolf would ever wear in the wild, faces that stayed rounded, wide-eyed, almost puppy-like into adulthood. Biologists call this pattern domestication syndrome. Change one thing, reduce fear and aggression, and many other things seem to shift along with it. It's as if there's a hidden switch in the mammalian body plan, one labelled wild at one end and domesticated at the other. Nudge it just a bit toward domesticated, and ears melt, faces soften, hormones rebalance, and behaviour tilts toward friendliness and dependence. We know this not just from dogs, but from an eerie replay of the process that happened much, much later. In the mid-20th century, a Russian geneticist named Dmitry Belyaev decided to do, in a few human lifetimes, what our ancestors had done accidentally over thousands of years. He took silver foxes, wild, sharp-toothed, wary, and bred them using a simple rule. Each generation he picked the calmest, least fearful animals, the ones who didn't bolt at the sound of a human step, the ones who seemed very faintly to tolerate us. He wasn't selecting for floppy ears. He wasn't selecting for spotted fur or curly tails or big round eyes. He was only selecting for tameness. But within a few dozen generations, the foxes started to change. Some were born with white patches on their fur, some with shorter snouts, some with curled tails. Ears that used to stand up now drooped. They began to wag their tails at humans, to seek eye contact, to whine when left alone. Their bodies, their faces, their stress hormones, their reproductive cycles, all shifted, cascading out from that one point of selection. Belyaev's foxes became, in effect, proto-dogs, not because anyone set out to sculpt them that way, but because that's what happens when evolution is pushed, hard and consistently, toward friendliness. The same thing seems to have happened with wolves. Early humans probably didn't think of themselves as breeders. They weren't drawing up pedigrees around the campfire. They were just more likely to tolerate the bold but not aggressive wolf, the one that didn't snap at children, the one that followed the group without becoming a threat. Those wolves got scraps. They got shelter near camp. They had more pups survive long enough to breed. Over centuries, maybe millennia, the wild wolf's sharp profile blurred. And then something else happened. Diversity. Once humans started keeping dogs in earnest, the single type of proto-dog fractured into many. At first, this wasn't about aesthetics. It was about work. Different groups, facing different challenges, slowly shaped different kinds of dogs. In open grasslands where herds needed to be watched and steered, humans favoured dogs that could run all day, nip at heels without injuring, respond instantly to whistles or gestures. The herders, lean bodies, sharp minds, nerves tuned like violin strings to human cues. In mountain passes and forest edges, people started selecting for something else. Vigilance and courage, a willingness to stand between the camp and whatever might emerge from the dark. Guardian dogs grew larger, more imposing, suspicious of strangers but devoted to their own people and animals. Hunters took the partnership even further. Some dogs were tuned to scent, able to follow invisible chemical trails over miles of terrain. Others were tuned to sight and speed, chasing down fast-moving prey over open ground. Still others specialized, flushing animals from dense brush, diving into icy water after fallen birds, tracking wounded prey. Form followed function. slender sighthounds on the plains, thick-coated, web-footed retrievers near water, short-legged terriers for diving into burrows and dragging out animals that preferred not to be found. And then there were the companions. Even in very ancient societies, not every dog worked in a clear, utilitarian way. Archaeological sites show burials where dogs are laid beside humans, clearly valued beyond their practical use. Small, lap-sized dogs emerge early in some civilizations, bred less for hunting or guarding and more for being near us, warming feet, alerting to visitors, offering company in long winter nights. By the time agriculture spread and villages swelled into towns, dogs had already split into multiple functional types: herders, hunters, guardians, companions, and various mixtures in between. But under all of that variety, something deeper had shifted too: their minds. A modern wolf raised by humans can be quite tame. It may accept hand-feeding, tolerate petting, even show what looks like affection. But wolves, even friendly ones, don't read us the way dogs do. Ask a wolf pup and a dog pup to solve a very simple puzzle: 2 cups, one with food under it, one empty, and then just point. Dogs, even very young, untrained ones, watch the human hand, look back at the cups, and choose the one indicated. Wolves mostly ignore the gesture. They sniff around, they guess, but the idea that your pointing finger is information, is meaningful, doesn't quite land. Dogs treat human faces, hands, and voices as if they were written instructions. Over thousands of years, individuals who were just a bit better at understanding human signals had a huge advantage. They got fed more reliably. They were allowed to stay closer. They were trusted with more important jobs. The result is a mind that orbits ours. Modern dogs can follow eye direction, read subtle shifts in facial expression, and interpret tone of voice in ways almost no other animal can. Some can learn hundreds of human words. Others appear to distinguish between deliberate commands and casual speech. Many will comfort a crying person, but ignore someone humming or laughing. Their brains light up in scanners when they smell or hear their favorite humans, patterns that look uncannily like attachment. It's tempting to say we trained dogs to do this, but it may be more accurate to say we created an environment where those interpretations, those leaps toward human minds, were consistently rewarded. Evolution did the training for us, and it didn't stop at behavior. As humans shifted from hunting and gathering to farming, another pressure crept in: diet. Wolves are carnivores that can eat some plant food, but their bodies aren't built to thrive on large amounts of starch. Early village dogs, though, were living off human leftovers: porridge scraps, discarded bread, root vegetable peelings, whatever fell from the human table and garbage heap. In that world, an animal that could digest starch efficiently had a serious edge. Genetic studies show that dogs carry multiple copies of certain genes involved in breaking down carbohydrates, particularly starches. These genes ramp up the production of enzymes like amylase that turn complex plant sugars into usable energy. Wolves generally have far fewer copies. The timing is revealing. These genetic changes in dogs appear to track the spread of agriculture in human populations. As humans cultivated grains and tubers, dogs followed, their intestines slowly rewiring to match the new human diet. Their partnership with us had moved from the hunt to the hearth. They were no longer just assistants in killing, they were co-scavengers of a new kind of food. By the time written history began, dogs were already a bewildering assortment of shapes and talents. But all of that variation still unfolded relatively slowly. Change took place over centuries, sometimes over millennia. Then, in a geological blink, in the last few hundred years, humans discovered something else: selective breeding on an industrial scale. With the rise of formal kennel clubs and written standards in the 19th and 20th centuries, people began sculpting dogs with an intensity no previous age had attempted. Traits that once took many generations to appear became fixed in a handful of years. Someone wanted a dog small enough to fit in a sleeve. Breed the smallest of the small together. Someone else wanted a dog whose nose could track a scent for days. Breed the best trackers with each other, over and over. The result is the modern explosion of dog breeds. Tiny chihuahuas weighing less than a kilogram, Great Danes towering over small adults, dogs with almost no muzzle at all like pugs and bulldogs, others with elongated faces like collies and greyhounds, coats like velvet, coats like cords, coats that never stop growing. It's a triumph of human-directed evolution. It's also a problem. Pushing bodies so far from their original shape has a cost. Many modern breeds carry heavy genetic loads, hip dysplasia in large dogs, breathing difficulties in flat-faced ones, heart defects, eye problems, skin disorders. When a breed's appearance is prioritized over its health, when the curve of a skull or the length of a leg becomes more important than robust genetics, dogs suffer. In a way, this is domestication turned inward on itself. Early humans selected for survival traits: friendliness, cooperation, versatility. Modern breed standards sometimes select for aesthetic extremes. The same evolutionary tools that made wolf into dog can also make dog into a creature that struggles simply to be a healthy dog. Beneath all these changes, though, something fundamental remains: the emotional link. And this raises a quiet, slightly unsettling question as you lie in the dark and hear a dog sigh in its sleep. Have dogs evolved to manipulate our emotions? Look at a classic puppy eyes expression: the slightly raised inner eyebrows, the softened gaze, the tilt of the head. For a long time, people assumed we were just reading human emotions into an animal face. But anatomical studies found something more concrete. Many dogs have a specific small muscle near the eye that wolves largely lack. That muscle helps lift the inner corner of the eyebrow, creating a look that humans interpret as sad, pleading, or attentive. It's not proof of conscious manipulation. Puppies aren't sitting there calculating which muscle to flex. But over many generations, dogs that happened, by chance, to move their faces in ways humans found cute or emotionally compelling, likely got more attention, more food, more care, those dogs survived and passed on their facial structure. Our nervous systems, tuned by millions of years of parenting our own young, respond almost automatically to large eyes, rounded faces, and expressive brows. Dogs slipped into that ancient circuit and found a comfortable place there. Whether we see it as manipulation or communication depends on how we feel about the partnership itself. From one angle, dogs have hacked our caregiving instincts, turning human affection into a survival resource. From another, we have co-created a species that is exquisitely good at signaling its needs to us, and at reading ours in return. Either way, this is where the transformation leads, to a creature whose body and mind are partly written by human choices. A former wolf line that now curls up in city apartments and rural farmhouses, under desks and beside campfires, listening to our voices, studying our faces, adjusting itself constantly to our moods. The dog is not just shaped by evolution, it is shaped by our stories about what a dog should be. Our fears, our needs, our tenderness, our mistakes. We remade the wolf, and in doing so we quietly remade ourselves into people who expect loyalty in brown eyes, who read meaning in a wagging tail, who feel at some deep level that the world is more complete when a dog is sleeping nearby. And while cats watched this whole experiment from the shadows, choosing a very different kind of deal, dogs walked all the way into the circle of light and stayed there, changing with us as we changed the world. Picture a village 5,000 years ago. Clay walls, grain stores, the soft rustle of harvested wheat drying in the sun. At night the granaries aren't empty. They pulse with tiny heartbeats. Mice, rats, beetles, all feasting on the food your people worked so hard to grow. And then, silently, something else slips in. A small striped hunter, eyes wide in the dark, movements so smooth they barely ripple the air. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for instructions. It just hunts. By morning there are fewer mice, maybe some torn bodies left behind like tiny rituals on the threshing floor. The people notice. They don't chase the cat away. They leave a little scrap of food out by the doorway, not as a command, as an invitation. This is the cat's domestication story. Not a surrender, not a reshaping, a bargain. While wolves were being gradually sculpted into dogs, their bodies, their minds, their instincts softened and redirected by thousands of years of intense selective breeding, cats were mostly left alone. For most of human history, nobody was planning cat bloodlines, pairing specific individuals, tracking traits over generations. Because cats came mostly pre-made. The wild ancestor of the house cat, the Near Eastern wildcat, was already perfectly adapted to the job humans needed done. Small, stealthy, an expert at ambush, comfortable living on the edges of human settlements as long as there were rodents to hunt. You didn't have to redesign this animal from the ground up. You just had to not scare it away. So for thousands of years, selective breeding barely touched cats at all. There were no medieval cat kennels deciding which felines would be allowed to mate. No elaborate pedigrees stretching back centuries. Most cats in human history were what biologists would call self-domesticated commensals. Animals that lived alongside humans not because humans intentionally bred them that way, but because it suited their own interests. The cats that were less afraid of people had access to more mice, more shelter, more leftover food. They thrived in villages and towns. The ones that were too fearful stayed in the wild and remained wildcats. Over generations, that gentle bias did nudge the population, but it wasn't the relentless, targeted selection that shaped dogs. You can see the difference in the timeline. Dogs show clear signs of intense human-driven breeding deep in prehistory. Changes in skull shape, teeth size, body proportions. Cats. For most of their shared history with humans, domestic cats and wild cats are so similar that archaeologists struggle to tell their bones apart. From the cat's perspective, there was no need to surrender control. It could walk into human space, hunt the vermin attracted by human grain, maybe accept some scraps, and then leave whenever it wanted. No leash, no commands, no obligation to guard, herd, or fetch. If humans disappeared overnight, the cat's life plan would barely change. Mice are still mice. Birds are still birds. Darkness is still the cat's oldest friend. This independence is written deep into its social wiring. Cats evolved as mostly solitary hunters. One cat stalking alone, listening for the faint scrape of tiny claws under the grass. One cat deciding where to sleep, where to hunt, when to move. Even in wild populations where food is abundant and you see loose colonies, those cats still operate as individuals sharing a space, not as tightly integrated packs with coordinated roles like wolves. Dogs descended from pack-living wolves came to humans already primed for social reshaping. They were used to following leaders, reading group signals, coordinating hunts. It wasn't a huge leap to redirect that social focus toward humans. A wolf that looked to its alpha for cues could become a dog that looked to its human. Cats never made that leap. They can live with us. They can even form social bonds, especially when resources are predictable. But the basic template is different. They don't need a hierarchy to survive. They don't need a leader. Their default mode is self-reliance. And that solitary template put a hard limit on how far domestication could push them. When humans started seriously reshaping dogs, they were selecting for traits that made them easier to integrate into human social systems. Obedience, attentiveness, a strong desire to please. Dogs that were more responsive to human cues survived and reproduced under human protection. Over time, this sculpted an animal that feels incomplete without a social role. Try applying that pressure to early cats and you hit a wall. A cat that's too dependent on humans, too distracted by social signals, too compliant, loses the very edge that makes it useful. Its job is to be an independent hunter, to patrol the edges, not to sit waiting for instructions. So the cat stayed mostly as it was. An expert predator wearing a thin layer of tolerance for humans like a cloak it can shrug off at any time. You can see this continuity in their behavior. Watch a house cat crouched in your living room, body low, eyes locked on a toy, tail twitching in tiny arcs. That sequence, creep, pause, pounce, is almost identical to a wild cat hunting rodents in the dusk thousands of years ago. Nobody bred that into them. It survived intact because we never tried to remove it. Their play is practice for killing. Their sudden sprints down the hallway at midnight aren't random madness. They're the ghost echoes of crepuscular hunting times, dawn and dusk activity written into their nervous systems. When a cat bats at a dangling string, then grabs it with its front paws and delivers rapid kicks with the hind legs, you're watching a killing technique designed for pinning small prey. It's performance art directed at your shoelaces. Even their senses remain fine-tuned for the hunt. Vision optimized for low light. Whiskers that map the air and the tight spaces a mouse might squeeze through. Hearing calibrated to the frequencies of tiny feet on dry leaves. These are not features you see radically altered by selective breeding the way you do in dogs. Physically, domestic cats are only subtly different from their wild ancestors. Slightly smaller overall, slightly smaller brains, especially in areas linked to fear and reactivity, which may reflect a reduced need for constant vigilance in human environments. But the skeletal structure, the teeth, the muscles, the hunting toolkit, they're basically the same. The most obvious changes are cosmetic. Coat colours and patterns, spots, stripes, blotches, solids, colour points, long hair, short hair, even hairless. Once cats settled into human communities and populations grew denser, random mutations affecting fur became more common. Humans sometimes favoured the more unusual ones. A white cat in an Egyptian temple, a striking calico in a merchant's home. Over time that created the dizzying variety of coats we see today. But underneath the fashion, the hunter remains. If you remove the support of humans, you see how little has changed. A dog left to fend for itself often struggles, especially the heavily specialized breeds. A pug doesn't turn itself into a wolf. A chihuahua doesn't become a coyote. There are feral dog populations, but they tend to form loose packs and slowly revert toward a general pariah dog morphology, not true wild canids. Cats, they slip back into wild living astonishingly fast. When domestic cats are abandoned or born without significant human contact, they can become fully functional feral predators within a generation, sometimes within a single lifetime. A feral cat colony can look, in behavior and ecology, very similar to a population of small wildcats, hunting, defending territories, breeding, raising young in sheltered dens. They don't need us to organize them. They don't need our protection to define their world. Given enough prey and a mild climate, feral cats can sustain themselves indefinitely, hunting birds, rodents, reptiles, even small mammals. This is one reason feral cats are such a powerful invasive species. They bring a wildcat's hunting prowess into ecosystems whose native prey haven't had time to evolve defenses against such efficient predators. The domestic dog, in many forms, depends on humans to survive. The domestic cat carries its own survival kit. From an evolutionary point of view, you could argue that cats never completed the journey to domestication. They paused halfway, took what they wanted from us, shelter, surplus food, a reliable rodent buffet, and kept everything they needed to walk away. And yet, in the last couple of centuries, humans have finally begun trying to do to cats what we did to dogs thousands of years ago. Turn them into designed breeds. Persians with flat faces and flowing coats. Siamese with elongated bodies and pointed coloration. Bengals with spotted jungle patterns. Sphinx cats without fur. Scottish folds with curled ears. Breeders are now manipulating genes in deliberate ways, tracking lineages, emphasizing certain traits. But notice what's mostly being changed. Appearance, coat length, color, texture, ear shape, tail length, sometimes body proportions, the core behavior, the predatory reflexes, the independence, the tendency to set their own agenda, has proven much harder to rewire. You can breed a cat that looks like a tiny leopard, but it still slinks around your house like an ambush hunter. You can breed a cat with a face so flat it needs help cleaning its eyes, but it still needs blankets like it's making a nest in long grass. You can breed a cat that purrs louder, that tolerates handling more, that seeks out human contact more often. But when a fly buzzes past, its whole nervous system still lights up in the same way a wildcat's would. Attempts to fundamentally remake cat psychology into something more dog-like, more eager to obey, more tolerant of direction, more consistently attentive to human commands, haven't had much success. You can train individual cats, you can select for friendlier temperaments, but the species-level template resists, because friendship and obedience are not the same thing. Cats can bond deeply with humans, but the bond is negotiated, not imposed. They come when they choose. They accept affection when they want it. They set the terms of engagement. And when they walk away mid-pet, it isn't rudeness. It's the quiet assertion of a nervous system evolved to never fully surrender autonomy. This is what makes cats both frustrating and fascinating to us. We live with an animal that seems to belong partly to our world and partly to another older one. A creature that will curl on your chest, purring like a small engine, then moments later launch itself off to stalk an invisible threat in the hallway. An animal that can recognize your voice, distinguish your footsteps, even show signs of missing you, and yet still stare at you from across the room with an expression that seems to say, "I was fine before your species invented doors." We often interpret this as aloofness, but from an evolutionary perspective, it's simply a different balance of dependence and freedom. The dog staked its survival strategy on attaching itself deeply to us, letting us direct its fate. The cat kept its original strategy and added us as a convenient resource. That means our power over the cat's evolution has always been limited. We could nudge coat colours, encourage a bit more tolerance, shape a few breed-specific quirks. But the core architecture, solitary predator adapted to small prey, remained mostly untouched. So when you watch your cat leap effortlessly onto a high shelf, thread its body through a gap you were sure was too small, then freeze and stare at some sound only it can hear, you're not just seeing a pet. You're seeing a wild animal in a thin, flexible partnership with our species. Not a redesign, not a reinvention, a truce. The cat stayed wild enough to leave whenever it wants, and somehow that refusal to fully submit is part of what draws us in. Picture this. It's late. The house is quiet. Outside, the world is doing whatever it does when you're not looking. Inside, two predators are asleep in your living room. One is curled into a tight spiral, tail over nose, as if it were a tiny snow leopard hiding from a blizzard that no longer exists. The other is on its back, legs in the air, chest exposed, snoring louder than any animal that small has any right to. If a wolf slept like that in the wild, it would be dead before sunrise. Same planet, same basic carnivore blueprint. But the minds inside those skulls evolved for very different games. Start with the simplest question. How do they love? Dogs evolved in packs, and then they joined ours. For hundreds of thousands of years, social canids survived because they could form intense, stable bonds with other wolves. Parents with pups, hunters with each other, pack with pack. If you can't trust the animal next to you when a 700-pound elk spins and charges, you don't make it. So when wolves slipped into human camps and began the slow process of domestication, evolution didn't have to invent dog devotion from scratch. It just had to redirect it. The same neural circuits that once locked a young wolf onto its parents and packmates now lock a dog onto you. Modern studies show this in strangely human ways. Put a dog in a room with its person and a stranger, then have the person leave. Heart rate jumps. Cortisol, the stress hormone, rises. The dog may whine, scratch at the door, pace. When the person returns, oxytocin spikes in both of them, the same hormone that flows between human parent and baby. The dog looks, licks, leans, and the nervous system settles. This is what psychologists call an anxious but attached style. Intense bonding, intense worry when that bond feels threatened. Cats were never asked to run headlong at a bison in formation. Their ancestors survived by being invisible, alone. A solitary hunter that depends on stealth and patience can't afford to fall apart every time another animal walks away. So when researchers run a similar experiment with cats, the pattern is different. Many cats notice when their person leaves. Ears swivel, eyes track the door, some vocalize. But their stress signature is generally lower. When the person returns, some cats greet, rub, even purr. But many also wander off to resume whatever they were doing before. Grooming, sitting, staring into that middle distance that seems to belong to another dimension. To a human, conditioned by stories that equate love with constant attention that can feel like indifference. But it fits what attachment researchers would call a securely independent style. The cat doesn't collapse without you because its evolutionary template doesn't expect anyone to be a permanent, reliable partner in survival. It can bond, it can grieve, it can show clear preference for one person over another. But its baseline assumption is, I am responsible for my own safety. Two attachment strategies, both forged by predators facing very different risks. The dog, descended from a pack that lived or died together. The cat, descended from small solitary hunters for whom panic was a luxury nobody survived. If you listen to them, you can hear those different worlds in the sounds they make. Dogs are noisy. Barks, whines, yips, growls, woofs that seem to contain entire emotional essays. In wolf packs, vocalizations helped coordinate hunts, warn of danger, and keep contact through forests and snowstorms. Domestication amplified this. Wolves rarely bark the way dogs do. Dogs, under thousands of years of human selection, became more vocal, more flexible, more tuned to our attention. Their sounds are not just for other dogs, they are for us. High-pitched whines that tug at our caregiving instincts. Sharp alarm barks that make us look up from the fire or the phone. Play barks that invite us to join a game. Tail wags, body wiggles, whole body punctuation marks after each vocal sentence. Cats, in contrast, come from a much quieter lineage. A solitary hunter that announces its presence loudly doesn't get many meals. Feral adult cats in the wild rarely meow to each other. They growl, hiss, yowl in fights or mating, but that sweet, insistent row you hear in your kitchen at 6 a.m. is something stranger. It's for you. Multiple studies suggest that domestic cats have essentially invented a new language to talk to humans. Kittens meow to get their mother's attention, but wild adults mostly stop. Human-raised cats don't. Their meows diversify. Questioning, complaining, demanding, pleading. Some even blend a high-frequency element that overlaps with the acoustic range of human infant cries, a sound our brains are hardwired to find urgent. You could see this as manipulation, or as a clever adaptation. In a human household, the cat that can make sounds humans intuitively respond to gets fed, let in, let out, protected. Over generations, the cats who were better at speaking human did better. And it's not just sound. Cats have a whole quiet channel. The slow blink, eyes closing and opening in exaggerated lazy motion. In feline body language, staring can be a threat. A slow blink is the opposite. A signal of trust, relaxation. Some researchers think cats extended this behavior to humans as a way of saying, in cross-species grammar, I am not a danger. I accept that you are not either. Experiments show that when humans slow blink at cats, cats are more likely to approach and interact. Then there's the purr. Its exact meaning is still debated. Contentment, sure, but also pain, stress, even anticipation. Its frequency range overlaps with vibrations that, in other mammals, can stimulate bone healing and tissue repair. Whether that's coincidence or evolutionary self-soothing technology is still an open question. Dogs have their own rich body language, play bows, tail positions, ear angles, but it's generally more obvious, more broadcast. Cat communication is narrower, more encrypted. You have to be paying attention, which might be the point. Watch how they play, and you get another window into their minds. A dog with energy to burn wants company. Tug of war, fetch, chase. The game often only comes alive when someone else participates. Play, for a dog, is rehearsal for social life. Practicing roles. The chaser, the chased, the blocker, the scout. Even solo toy chewing has a social ghost in it, a rehearsal for tugging meat from a carcass while other pack members jostle nearby. A cat can play with you, batting at a string, pouncing on your moving feet under the blanket. But it is just as capable of launching into an elaborate solo drama at 3 a.m, invisible prey, perfectly timed ambushes on the corner of a couch, sudden, explosive sprints followed by proud, alert stillness. Their play maps directly onto their ancestral hunting strategies. Cats rehearse the full, solitary stalk-pounce-kill routine over and over. Dogs rehearse cooperative chase and contest. One mind wired for a self-contained, tightly focused sequence of actions. The other wired for dynamic, responsive interaction with teammates. Put a puzzle in front of them and you can see how that social wiring changes their approach to the world itself. In one famous type of experiment, an animal is given a sealed container with food inside. There's a way to open it, but it takes persistence and discovery. First, the animal is allowed to figure it out. Then the rules are quietly changed so the container can't be opened anymore. Dogs, when they realize the puzzle isn't working, often do something peculiar, at least from a wolf's point of view. They stop, look to the nearest human and make eye contact. They bark, whine, or paw, as if saying, the environment isn't behaving. You, the big-brained, tool-using ape, fix it. Cats, under similar conditions, are more likely to keep experimenting on the object itself, or walk away entirely. Little or no appeal to the human observer. To some, that looks like stubborn independence. To others, sophisticated expectation management. In the cat's world, nobody else is responsible for solving your problem. Dogs, domesticated from pack hunters, whose lives depended on reading social cues, seem to have extended that into a powerful form of social intelligence with humans. They track our gaze, follow our pointing fingers, distinguish between happy and angry tones, and adjust their behavior accordingly. Some can learn hundreds of verbal cues. They are in a sense specialists in other minds. Cats are specialists in the material world. Many do understand pointing, tone, routine. But compared to dogs, their social cognition seems narrower, focused on specific individuals and situations. Their real brilliance often shows up in physical navigation, spatial memory, and fine-tuned timing. They know exactly when you always get up, exactly which cupboard door means food, exactly how much force they can use to push a fragile object toward the edge of a shelf without quite knocking it off, until they decide to. This difference has sparked a long-running scientific argument. Which species is smarter? The dog, who can learn human words, perform complex tasks and show exquisite sensitivity to our emotions, or the cat, who solves problems silently, appears less eager to please, and seems to navigate its world with an eerie, detached confidence. Counting neurons, dogs come out ahead. Their brains contain more cortical neurons than cats, which, in many mammals, correlates with problem-solving capacity. But intelligence is not a single ladder with everyone standing on different rungs. It's a toolkit shaped by the problems each species needed to solve. Dogs needed to track moving prey, coordinate with packmates, interpret subtle signals from both other canids and, later, humans. A dog that can quickly infer the human is sad, move closer. Or, the human pointed here, something important is over there, has a survival advantage in a human world. Cats needed to stalk, ambush, evade larger predators, and make rapid decisions alone. A cat that can quickly calculate leap trajectories, memorize safe routes, and ignore irrelevant social distractions has an advantage in its world. So when we ask who is smarter, we're really asking, smarter at what? Reading humans? Dogs. Moving silently through a three-dimensional landscape, making micro-decisions about balance, distance, and cover? Probably cats. Both carry minds that are highly specialized instruments, not general-purpose computers. And while we study them, they're studying us. Living with a dog does something to the human nervous system. A creature that tracks your every move, rejoices when you enter a room, and forgives you almost everything trains you to think of yourself as central, wanted, necessary. Dogs reward consistency, routine, and clear communication. People who live with dogs often walk more, talk more, go outside more. They plan around another being's needs, and in return get a steady stream of uncomplicated, visible affection. A dog can nudge humans towards certain psychological states: responsibility, protectiveness, emotional openness. For some, the dog's unwavering attention is a balm against loneliness. For others, it's a constant reminder that their actions ripple outward into another mind. Cats shape us differently. Here is a creature that can thrive without you, and yet chooses at times to sit on your chest, purr against your ribs, sleep in the crook of your knees. It does not perform obedience in the same way. It does not always come when called. It may walk away in the middle of being petted. To live peacefully with a cat, you learn to tolerate ambiguity. You become a student of subtle signals, the angle of ears, the twitch of a tail, the difference between a happy purr and an overstimulated one. You discover that affection can be real without being constant, that respect sometimes means letting another being ignore you. For some people, this is frustrating. For others, it's strangely liberating. The cat invites a different version of love, less about control, more about coexistence, less about being needed, more about being accepted on another creature's terms. Over thousands of years, these two minds have quietly shaped our own. They have given us models of relationship that sit at opposite ends of a spectrum. The dog's fused identity, your pack is my pack, and the cat's parallel path. I walk beside you, not behind you. Some nights, if you sit in the dark and listen, you can almost hear those evolutionary histories breathing in your home. The steady dog snore, trusting the pack to keep it safe. The light cat rustle, always half ready to move if the world shifts unexpectedly. Two predators, two psychologies. both survivors of ancient selection pressures we can barely imagine, and somehow, against all odds, both have decided that for now, their safest hunting ground is our hearts. So now, when you look at a cat curled into a perfect circle at the foot of your bed, or a dog sprawled sideways snoring like a tiny furry thunderstorm, you're not just seeing pets. You're seeing the endpoint of two survival strategies that began to diverge tens of millions of years ago. One line chose stealth, silence, and self-reliance. An animal honed to survive alone, to trust its own senses, to depend on no one but itself. The other chose cooperation, communication, and trust in the group. An animal whose best chance at survival came from reading others, syncing movements, and sharing the risks of the hunt. For most of their history, these paths had nothing to do with us. Cats were perfecting the art of the solo ambush. Wolves were refining the choreography of the pack chase. Neither species knew that somewhere out there, a clever primate was slowly assembling fire, tools, and language, and would eventually rewrite the rules for everyone. And yet somehow, through a long chain of unlikely events, both lines ended up here, in our homes, asleep on our couches, on our laps, at our feet. Not because evolution had a plan, but because their ancient strategies happened to mesh with ours. The cat's talent for quiet rodent control slotted neatly into our early granaries and villages. The wolf's social brain, its willingness to bond and follow, made it the perfect ally for a species that was itself obsessed with cooperation and stories. Millions of years of divergence, two completely different blueprints for staying alive, and they both converge on us. If you zoom out far enough, it starts to look like a lesson. Evolution didn't choose a single correct answer to the problem of life as a carnivore. It explored many. It produced the solitary stalker and the collaborative chaser, the independent specialist and the adaptable teammate. Both work, both persisted, both, in their own way, were good enough to survive ice ages, droughts, and extinctions, and still be here when we came along. And that's maybe the most beautiful part of this story. There was no guarantee that either lineage would intersect with human history at all. The world could easily have been full of small insectivores and giant flightless birds, and our nights would be much quieter and much lonelier. Instead, by sheer contingency, we share our brief moment in time with these two very different descendants of ancient carnivores, who now curl against us as if they had always belonged there. When your cat ignores you for hours, and then suddenly decides your chest is the only acceptable sleeping surface, that's a whisper from the solitary hunter, slowly learning to tolerate closeness. When your dog glances back at you on a walk, checking your pace, matching your mood, that's the pack animal, still counting you as part of its moving family. They are reminders that there is no single way to be intelligent, no single way to be social, no single path through evolution that leads to love and companionship. The cat and the dog took opposite routes through deep time, and both routes ran straight through our front door. If you've enjoyed wandering down those paths tonight, listening as you fall asleep or winding down after a long day, you can gently tap like or subscribe if you'd like more quiet journeys through natural history. It helps other sleepy minds find their way here. If you feel awake enough, you're welcome to leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from, and whether you share your home with cats, dogs, or both. Somewhere out there in the dark, your answer will be joining thousands of others, forming its own little network of humans and their carnivore companions. And if you'd like to support the channel a bit more directly, there's an option to join as a YouTube member. That helps me keep making these long, gentle stories, but it's completely optional. Your presence, your time, and your curiosity are already more than enough. For now, just picture this. Across the planet, in apartments and farmhouses, in dorm rooms and city towers, in villages and suburbs and remote cabins, lights are dimming. Screens are fading to black. And in all those places cats are tucking their paws under their chests, tails wrapped like question marks coming to rest. Dogs are circling 3 times for reasons they don't remember, then collapsing with a sigh against familiar legs. 2 ancient strategies, 2 ways of being, settling into the same simple ritual, sleeping beside a human. However different their paths, tonight they end in the same place, curled in the same glow, breathing in time with us as the long story of evolution takes a brief, quiet pause, and everything, for a little while, is finally still.